नमस्कार, आप सब लोगों का स्वागत है। सबसे पहले मैं आप लोगों का परिचय आज के स्पीकर से करवा दूँ। हमारे साथ जुड़े हैं श्री स्वपन दास गुप्ता जी, माननीय राज्यसभा सांसद और पद्म भूषण से नवाजे हुए हमारे साथ आज जुड़े हुए हैं। सर एक बहुत ही एमिनेंट जर्नलिस्ट हैं और इंग्लिश डेलीज़ में ये काफ़ी लिखते रहे हैं, स्टेट्समैन और टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया जैसे अखबारों में ये एडिटोरियल पोजीशंस पर रहे हैं। और आज हमारे साथ भारत-चीन गतिरोध, इंडिया-चाइना स्टैंड ऑफ के मुद्दे पर चर्चा करेंगे। अभी कुछ दिन पहले ही सर का आर्टिकल भी आया था टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया में। आर्टिकल का टाइटल था इंडिया नीड्स बोथ माइंड एंड मसल पावर टू काउंटर चाइना। और दूसरे हमारे साथ जो स्पीकर हैं वो हैं श्री अभिजीत पांडे जी, जवाहरलाल नेहरू विश्वविद्यालय के सेंटर फॉर इनर एशियन स्टडीज में रिसर्च स्कॉलर है, अभी एमफिल में हैं। और अब मैं जरा सा विषय की मैं भूमिका रखूंगा विषय की, फिर उसके बाद हमारे स्पीकर चर्चा शुरू करेंगे। तो भारत चीन गतिरोध जो है वो कोई नया हमारे लिए विषय नहीं है। 2017 में भी हमने एक काफी लंबा गतिरोध देखा था और वहां पर ऐसा चाइनीज मीडिया में एक परसेप्शन बनी थी, चीन में एक परसेप्शन बना था कि उनकी सरकार को पीछे हटना पड़ा था, बैकअप करना पड़ा था। ऐसा रिपोर्ट करती है चीनी सरकार की अपनी माउथ पीस ग्लोबल टाइम्स। ऐसा एक रिपोर्ट उन्होंने दिया था कि हमारी जनता में एक ऐसा परसेप्शन बना कि चीन की सरकार को पीछे हटना पड़ा डोकलाम के मुद्दे पर। आज जो है हमारा जो ये स्टैंड ऑफ है और 15 जून की रात में जो एक घटना हुई जहां पर गोली तो नहीं चली पर बहुत ज्यादा बर्बरतापूर्ण लड़ाई हुई है और हमारे 20 सैनिक शहीद हुए हैं। और कुछ अमेरिकी इंटेलिजेंस एजेंसियों ने कहा है कि उनके भी कुछ 42-43 लोग जख्मी हुए हैं या फिर मारे गए हैं। और ऐसे समय में फिर भारत सरकार ने कुछ कदम उठाए, जैसे कि 59 चीनी ऐप्स को बैन कर दिया गया। आज अखबार में हर जगह ये चर्चा है कि हाईवे प्रोजेक्ट्स में भी अब चीनी कंपनियों को हम कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स नहीं देंगे। तो ऐसे समय में क्या है, क्या इतिहास है इस लड़ाई का, क्यों आज ये स्टैंड ऑफ है, इस विषय पर हमारे दोनों एक्सपर्ट्स आज चर्चा करेंगे। तो सबसे पहले मैं निवेदन करूंगा अभिजीत जी से कि वो एक बार भूमिका रखें अच्छे से, एक बृहद हमें जानकारी दें, फिर स्वपन दास गुप्ता सर हमें विस्तार में बताएंगे। अभिजीत जी कृपया शुरुआत करें।
धन्यवाद विवेक जी। माननीय सांसद श्री स्वपन दास गुप्ता जी और इस चर्चा में शामिल हमारे सभी मित्रों, जैसा कि मुझे अभी जानकारी मिली कि ज़्यादा जो लोग इस चर्चा में शामिल हुए हैं वो ज़्यादा लोग स्टूडेंट्स हैं। और जैसा विवेक ने भी कहा कि मुझे जो अभी स्टैंड ऑफ है उसकी एक भूमिका रखनी है और मैं एक रिसर्च स्कॉलर हूँ, तो उस नाते मैं कोई अपना कमेंट ना देने के बजाय जो एक पूरा ये जो पूरा मसला है और उसके पहले की कुछ बातों को मैं रखना चाहूँगा और उसके बाद हम लोग स्वपन दास गुप्ता सर को सुनेंगे और हम लोग इस विषय पे और ज़्यादा हमें जानकारी मिलेगी। अगर हम इस स्टैंड ऑफ की बात करें तो ये स्टैंड ऑफ मई से चला आ रहा है और अभी 2-3 दिनों में ये करीब 2 महीनों का हो जाएगा। अगर हम भारत और चीन के संबंधों की बात करें तो इसी वर्ष अप्रैल में भारत और चीन संबंध के तकरीबन 7 दशक पूरे होने हैं और 70वीं वर्षगांठ मनाई जानी थी इसी अप्रैल में। और जब पिछले साल शी जिनपिंग भारत आए थे तो इस साल इस वर्षगांठ को मनाने के लिए काफ़ी कार्यक्रम होने वाले थे और इसको लेकर के भी चर्चाएं हुई थी। लेकिन आज जहां जो पूरा विश्व है वो चीन से शुरू हुए कोरोना वायरस से लड़ रहा है, वहीं इस समय भारत को चीन से आए हुए दो चीज़ों का सामना करना पड़ रहा है, एक कोरोना का और एक उनके जवानों का, जो बॉर्डर पर जो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट है उस रूप में हमें देखने को मिल रहा है। जब भारत और चीन के संबंध को देखते हैं तो अगर हम देखें तो भारत और चीन के संबंध जो रहे हैं वो शुरुआत से ही दोनों देशों के बीच में बॉर्डर को लेकर के टेंशन की स्थिति रही है। 1950 के दौरान ही जब चीन ने तिब्बत का अधिग्रहण कर लिया 1991 में, 1951 में, तो उसके बाद 1951 में, सॉरी 1951 में। तो उसके बाद ही माओ जेडोंग ने 5 फिंगर पॉलिसी का जिक्र किया, जिसमें उन्होंने कहा कि एक जो फिंगर है वो लद्दाख है, दूसरा नेपाल, तीसरा सिक्किम, चौथा भूटान और पांचवा अरुणाचल प्रदेश है। और कहा कि जो पहले भारत और चीन के बीच में बफर जो जोन था वो तिब्बत था, अब क्योंकि तिब्बत जो है वो चीन के अधिग्रहण में आ गया था, तो जो ये 5 जो रीजियंस हैं ये अब नए बफर के तौर पे आएंगे। और उसके बाद बॉर्डर को लेकर के दोनों देशों के बीच में स्थिति तनातनी की बनी रही और 1962 में हमने एक बड़ा युद्ध देखा। उसके बाद 1975 में भी इस तरह की घटनाएं हुई जब फैटलिटीज हुए। और उसके तकरीबन 45 साल के बाद इस बार जो स्टैंड ऑफ हुआ है उसमें 45 साल के बाद फैटलिटीज देखने को मिला है। और 15 जून की रात को दोनों जो सेनाएं थी आमने सामने थी मई के शुरुआत से ही, लेकिन 15 जून को दोनों के बीच में हाथापाई हुई और उसमें हम सब जानते हैं कि किस तरह से जो हथियार जो प्रॉपर वेपन होते हैं, बुलेट्स वो तो नहीं चले, लेकिन डंडों से और नुकीले झाड़ियों से या कांटों से हमला करके हमारे जवानों पे हमला किया गया। और तकरीबन अच्छी खासी संख्या में हमारे जवानों ने अपना सर्वोच्च बलिदान दिया। चीन का जो एग्जैक्ट नंबर है वो हमारे सामने नहीं है, क्योंकि वहाँ का जो पूरा पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम है वो बहुत ही ओपेक और ऑथोरिटेरियन है। तो उसको वहाँ से कोई भी इंफॉर्मेशन बाहर आने में बहुत इतना ज़्यादा फिल्टर्ड है, इतना ज़्यादा वहाँ पर रिस्ट्रिक्शंस हैं कि एग्जैक्ट जो इंफॉर्मेशन है वो नहीं आता है। लेकिन जैसा विवेक ने बताया कि अगर सोर्सेज को देखें जो इंटरनेशनल लेवल पे या यूएस के इंटेलिजेंस की जो खबर आई, तो उसके मुताबिक जो कैजुअलिटीज चाइनीज साइड में हुए हैं वो भारत से कहीं ज्यादा हुआ है। अब अगर देखें पिछले 2 दशकों में, तो इकोनॉमी के फ्रंट पे 2 दशकों में भारत और चीन के बीच में काफी ज्यादा इकोनॉमिक लेवल पे चीजें बढ़ी हैं। और जो ट्रेड कभी नेग्लेजिबल हुआ करता था वो आज एक अच्छा खासा एक वॉल्यूम में चला गया। अब अगर दूसरी ओर देखें तो बॉर्डर को लेकर तनातनी बनी रही, जैसा कि विवेक ने भी बताया कि पहले भी टेंशन हुए हैं। और 2013 में जो दिसपांग इलाका है वहां पे, 2014 में चुमार नाम का एक जगह वहां पे, और फिर 2017 में डोकलाम में एक लंबा स्टैंड ऑफ चला। और उसके बाद ये एक लगातार एक प्रोसेस चला है। और देखे तो शी जिनपिंग जब से सत्ता में आए हैं तब से एक ये सिस्टम रहा है। अगर उनका जो पूरा रवैया देखें तो वो एक्सपेंशनिस्ट रहा है, वो चाहे भारत के साथ हो या बाकी जो भी बॉर्डर जो शेयर करता है चीन जिन भी कंट्रीज के साथ, चाहे वो सेंट्रल एशिया में हो, चाहे वो रशिया के साथ हो, चाहे मंगोलिया के साथ हो, तो वहाँ एक इशू और कन्फ्लिक्ट की स्थिति बनी रहती है। और इसी दशक में देखें तो चीन ने बीआरआई का अपना जो प्रोजेक्ट है उसको भी लॉन्च किया, और उसको लेकर के भी काफी ज्यादा भारत ने भी काफी जगहों पे उसका विरोध किया। और सीपीईसी उसमें से आया और उसका भी काफी हद तक विरोध हुआ भारत की तरफ से। तो एक अगर देखें तो संबंध में एक तरफ ट्रेड था, लेकिन दूसरी ओर जो बाकी पॉलिटिकल लेवल पे था, तो एक डिप्लोमेटिक लेवल पे जो हमारे टॉप लीडरशिप थी वो मिलती रही, लेकिन बॉर्डर का जो इशू था उसको लेकर के तनातनी का स्थिति हमेशा बना रहा। अब अगर इसको देखें तो पहले और अब में एक तुलना अगर करें तो हमें एक डिफरेंस ये मिलता है कि जो पहले जो भारत की तरफ से जो एक्शंस होते थे वो यूनिडायरेक्शनल होते थे। अगर मिलिट्री एंगेजमेंट है तो मिलिट्री एंगेजमेंट ही वहां पे होता था। लेकिन अभी हम वर्तमान स्टैंड ऑफ में जब देखते हैं तो हम पाते हैं कि जो एंगेजमेंट है वो मल्टी डायमेंशनल है। चीन ने भी कोशिश की कि भारत को वो मल्टी डायमेंशनल तरीके से घेरे, चाहे वो इकोनॉमिक का हो या बॉर्डर पे मिलिट्री के रास्ते हो या टेक्नोलॉजी के रास्ते हो। लेकिन उसी का जो भारत ने भी जवाब दिया है, तो भारत ने भी उसको सिर्फ मिलिट्री तक सीमित नहीं रखते हुए इकोनॉमिक और टेक्नोलॉजिकल और बाकी चीजों से भी इस बार चीन को जवाब दिया है। और अगर देखें तो अगर चीन से हमें अगर उससे चीन का जैसा जो हमारा एंगेजमेंट है तो वो एक अभी अगर देखें तो पॉलिसीज में एक बहुत ही एक सोच करके कदम उठाए जा रहे हैं, ना कि एक नी जर्क रिएक्शन है कि कोई घटना हुई, फिर हमने उसके रिएक्शन में कोई घटना की। अभी जैसे अगर हम देखें तो जो ऐप को बैन करने की बात हुई, तो इसको लेकर के काफी समय से चर्चा चल रही थी, और अभी जो जिस तरह की घटनाएं हुई तो उसके बाद बैन किया गया। तो इसके पीछे हम देखते हैं कि जो डाटा है वो हमारे कंट्री का एक अच्छा खासा डाटा चीन के पास जाता था उनके ऐप के माध्यम से, और चीन का जो व्यवस्था है उसमें जो इन डाटा का एक पॉलिटिकल और मिलिट्री इस्तेमाल हो सकता था। तो कहीं ना कहीं ये नेशनल सिक्योरिटी के लिए एक बड़ा कदम था जिसको किया गया, जिसको सरकार ने उठाया है। अगर हम इसको डिप्लोमेटिक लेवल पे देखें तो चीन का एक मान सकते हैं कि चीन को भी लग रहा होगा कि जब दुनिया पूरे एक पैंडेमिक को लेकर के है, तो डिप्लोमेटिक लेवल पे इंडिया को, और जो एक इकोनॉमिक माइट अपना बना कर रखने की कोशिश कर रहा है चाइना, तो उसमें कितना फायदा डिप्लोमेटिकली इंडिया उठा पाएगा। तो हम अगर अभी देखें तो अभी जो पिछले कुछ दिनों का ही अगर चीजों को उठा करके देखें, तो अभी जिस तरह से जो ऐप को बैन किया भारत ने, तो इसका यूएसए ने स्वागत किया और पोम्पियो ने बयान दिया कि ये एक अच्छा कदम था। साथ ही साथ अगर हम देखें तो अभी यूनाइटेड नेशन सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल में चाइना एक एंटी इंडिया एक मूव लाने का कोशिश कर रहा था, जिसको यूएसए और जर्मनी दोनों ने उसमें उसका विरोध किया, और वहां पे भारत के साथ वो खड़े दिखे। ठीक उसी तरह फ्रांस ने भी अपना एक कॉन्डोलेंस मैसेज भेजा है जो 15 जून की घटना हुई उसको लेकर के, और उसने कहा है कि वो इस समय में एक फ्रेंडली गेस्चर के साथ भारत के साथ खड़ा है। तो इस तरह से हम देखें तो हमें यह पूरा देखने को मिलता है कि डिप्लोमेटिक लेवल पे भी आज जो भारत है वो बहुत ही असर्टिव तरीके से चाइना को से डील कर रहा है। दूसरी ओर इकोनॉमिक चीजों पे भी भारत उन जगहों पे धीरे धीरे उसको रोकने की कोशिश कर रहा है। हाँ, उसमें ये चीज जरूर ध्यान रखा जा रहा है कि भारत के इंडस्ट्रीज को मिनिमम नुकसान हो, जहाँ पे हम वहां से हमारा रॉ मटेरियल का सप्लाई आता है, तो वहां पे हम तुरंत उसको बंद नहीं करके बल्कि एक फेज्ड मैनर में और धीरे धीरे कर रहे हैं। पोर्ट को लेकर, पोर्ट्स पे जो उनके रॉ मटेरियल्स आते हैं उनको लेकर के भी चल रही हैं, और एक मिलिट्री के तौर पे भी भारत वहां पे जवाब दे रहा है। अगर मिलिट्री के तौर पे ही देखें तो पिछले कुछ समय में अगर देखें तो चीन अपने तरफ से कंस्ट्रक्शन कर रहा था इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर को, अपने साइड के बॉर्डर में वो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर को डेवलप कर रहा था। और भारत भी पिछले 6-7 सालों का देखें तो भारत भी बहुत तेजी से इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर को वहां पे डेवलप कर रहा था। तो वो कहीं ना कहीं एक जो वहां पे बॉर्डर पे जो चीजें चल रही थी उसको लेकर के एक प्रिपरेशन भारत का उसमें दिख रहा था पिछले 6-7 सालों में, और वो निश्चित उसका एक लाभ भारत को अभी भी मिल रहा है। अगर इन सब चीजों को देखें तो, और उसके बाद जो इंटरनेशनल लेवल पे भारत बहुत सारे अलायंसेस में, जैसे क्वाड हो गया या अमेरिका के साथ, तो बहुत जगहों पे अपना जो एक दायरा है उसको बढ़ा रहा है, जिससे कि चीन को कहीं ना कहीं इस पर चीन पर इसका प्रभाव पड़ेगा और भारत को कहीं ना कहीं इसका फायदा होगा। तो इन सारे बैकग्राउंड में जब हम देखते हैं इस पूरे मसले को, इस पूरे स्टैंड ऑफ को, तो समझने में हमें ज्यादा डायमेंशंस मिलते हैं। और जैसा कि स्वावलंबन के प्लेटफॉर्म पे पहले भी चर्चाएं हुई थी, तो उसमें इकोनॉमिक और स्ट्रेटेजिक चीजें क्या इसमें जियो पॉलिटिकल चीजें जो इश्यूज थे उन पर चर्चा हुई थी। तो एक ये मैंने कोशिश किया कि एक शॉर्ट में इसको एक रखा जाए, ताकि जो विभिन्न कुछ पॉइंट्स हैं जो भारत और चीन के संबंधों में और जो स्टैंड ऑफ है उसमें, तो रखने की कोशिश किया है। और अब आगे हमारे साथ स्वपन दासगुप्ता सर हैं, तो वो इस बात पे और ज्यादा विशेष रूप से बात करना रखेंगे। धन्यवाद।
धन्यवाद, नमस्कार और धन्यवाद अमिताभ जी और विवेक जी। पहले तो मैं थोड़ा दुख प्रकाश करूंगा कि मेरा हिंदी उतना मजबूत नहीं है कि आपको एक ऐसा एक कॉम्प्लेक्स सब्जेक्ट के ऊपर मैं हिंदी में बोलूं, तो मैं अंग्रेजी में ही बोलूंगा। तो आई होप दैट्स ओके।
Yes, sir, that is totally fine. You can continue
Okay,
in
thank you.
your language.
Thank you very much.
Okay, sir.
Thank you very much, and I'm very glad that Amitabh ji has given a very comprehensive background to the whole issue of what happened in Doklam and some of the ramifications. I won't go over those areas. Now, it is sometimes very tempting to look upon what happened along the Ladakh border, what happened and what is happening, the tensions, which is happening in the Ladakh sector of the LAC, as being in some way a broad continuation of the tensions which have marred India-China relations since 1962 and which also defined the war of 1962. Now, at one level, that seems perfectly reasonable and in order. Because if you look at 1962, the ostensible reason for the conflict was a difference over what constituted the border between India and China, and what China believed that the so-called imperialist treaties, notably the McMahon Line and some of the others, were no longer valid because they were unequal treaties and China had no intention of respecting them. And hence the conflict over what constituted, in any case, a rather difficult border. That's one way of looking at it, as to say that here again, once again, China having asserted its claim of sovereignty over what we call Arunachal Pradesh, is now trying to assert its sovereignty over Ladakh on the entire, I mean, they're saying it's limited to the Doklam, the Galwan Valley. But in reality, some of their statements say that actually they want to extend their sway to the whole of Ladakh. Now, historically, if you look at it, China has never made any secret of the fact that it considers certain outlying areas, which sometimes they call the five fingers of Tibet, as being tributary states of the Middle Kingdom. And this is a very old belief which they have, and which they've always believed, that the entire Arunachal Pradesh, Bhutan, Sikkim, Nepal, and Ladakh to be very much a part of the tributary states of the Middle Kingdom. That's been a historical claim which China has sometimes explicitly, sometimes overtly. They used to do it far more. There was once a map which they published to the extent to where their influence will go, and their influence at times seem to stretch right up to Bengal. And this they've historically considered as the ideal tributary states of the Middle Kingdom, of not exactly a part of it, but certainly areas which would be governed in a sense which would acknowledge Chinese sovereignty and would acknowledge the overlordship of the Middle Kingdom. So that's always been a historical thing which they felt was stymied in that what they call their century of humiliation, which began with the Opium War in the 1840s and continued right up to 1949. And they feel that that sort of distortion has got to be rectified in some way or the other. So that's one way of looking at the whole issue of what's taking place in Ladakh at the moment. There is another way of looking at it, which is again also a continuation of 1962. In 1962, one of the essential factors which governed the conflict, and which has come out subsequently in many archival documents from China, etc., is the fact that China viewed India as being its basic challenger. And in fact, it viewed Jawaharlal Nehru in particular as being a challenger to its influence in Asia. It believed that there could be no two powers which would compete for overlordship of Asia, and therefore the dominant Asian power had to be China, and therefore it was prudent on their part to give India a bloody nose in that. And a bloody nose is what they did succeed in giving India, which was completely unprepared for that conflict in 1962. Jawaharlal Nehru, Krishna Menon, and earlier to that Sardar Panikkar, who was India's ambassador to China earlier, all misled China into believing that a belief in a strong sort of anti-colonial enterprise would somehow prevent China from entertaining any aggressive intentions against India, and which is why in India they meekly succumbed to the forcible annexation of Tibet by China in 1950. A similar feature of foreign policy which helped China at that time was the belief that India was somehow abdicating what had been the historic, or rather what might loosely be called the Curzonian policy of extending the frontiers of India to have buffers. So the best defense for the frontiers of India lay in creating buffers which would enable the frontiers to be more effectively safeguarded. And Tibet was regarded as such a buffer. So was various places like Xinjiang, etc. Now, it may interest you to know that till the 50s, India had a consulate in Lhasa, India had a consulate in Kashgar, India had a consulate in Bukhara. These were India when I say British India, and which continued for a while after independence. In other words, it was that same principle that you must have areas of Indian influence which extends beyond the formal frontiers of India. And this was also part of the old Curzonian principle that everything from Aden right down to Singapore constituted the area of influence of India. Now that policy for Willy was abandoned by Jawaharlal Nehru because he too saw it as a sort of imperialist thing, and in line with his idea that what really mattered was the anti-colonial struggle, that what matters with the third world. So one of the casualties of prioritizing the third world and the anti-colonial struggles was the relative neglect of the security of India around its neighborhood. So I think that was also one of the factors which may have, because Chinese foreign policy, Chinese policy has always been tremendously opaque. It's always possible to have conjectures. It's never possible to have definitive answers. And also one of the things which has been often said that about the 1962 war was that it was a fallout of the debacle of the Great Leap Forward, which was an economic disaster by all means, but not known to the outside world at that particular point, and that this was a means of distraction. And similarly, a lot of people have said this is a distraction from the attacks which China has been subjected to, the accusations that the COVID crisis in the world has been somehow or the other a creation of China. However, interestingly, it's worth noticing that if the theory that it's all because of a domestic situation in China, the only thing I would like to point out is that as far as I'm aware, and as far as people who know the Chinese language and who know what is going on in China say, that the conflict in the Ladakh sector has been relatively unpublicized within China. So just as they were rather economical in their details of how many people of Chinese soldiers were killed in that skirmish in the Galwan Valley. While India gave the figures, China has yet not given the figures, and we are dependent on American and other intelligence sources to actually to speculate as to it. But China, therefore, has not really publicized this whole incident along these tensions with India, at least not as far as the border thing. I guess now with what Ravi Shankar has now called some other sort of internet strike or something like that. You know, the ban on the 19 apps of Chinese origin and increasing restrictions on Chinese investments within India. I guess the issue will no longer be secret, and it will enable the Chinese authorities to present it to their own people as an example of India's mean and bloody mindedness. Now, these are possibilities, and we've talked about it. However, I think one of the biggest reasons why I would really differ from those who tend to see the present face-off in Ladakh as being similar in nature to the 1962, minus the armed conflict so far, is that I think there is this fundamental difference between the China of 2020 and the Maoist China of 1962. And I think the most important thing we have to realize about this is the evolution of this doctrine called the Belt and Road. And I think most people in the world have tended to view this more as an economic policy and less as a comprehensive Chinese doctrine for what they see in the immediate future. And I think that's very important to stress that point, that what we are seeing in China is very much a part of this larger Belt and Road scheme, a scheme which is so important for them that it has actually been enshrined. And this is important, that in 2017, the Belt and Road was enshrined into the constitution of the Chinese Communist Party. In other words, while certain interpretations of the Belt and Road may vary in future, the basic objective of the Belt and Road remains a part of the doctrinal approach of China. Whether it's Xi Jinping or whoever may follow him in future. And the basic, and in essence, what does the Belt and Road think? It is, as some people would say, it's an alternative form of globalization. I think there's more to it than that. I think while we often have this idea that globalization is another prescription for Western domination. I think while that is true, I think the globalization as we know it involves in some way or the other a lessening of national boundaries. Although it means in terms of the strategic weight, it gives more to the West because of the historic advantage which they have taken. But in the case of the global Belt and Road issue, it's not merely a thing of infrastructure, connectivity, trade routes, a new version of the Silk Route, as some people would like to argue. It's not that at all. It's far, far beyond that. The scope of the Belt and Road as envisaged by China is basically the creation of another unipolar world, with China re-establishing its status as the Middle Kingdom. And the tentacles of the Belt and Road policy are quite awesome and comprehensive. The extent to which it has gone is just amazing and astonishing. Some of the features of it are pretty well known. The amount of investment which China, thanks to its very encouraging and huge huge trade surplus which it has accumulated over the decades, has invested all along Central Asia, parts of Africa, parts of Europe, and certainly in parts of Southeast Asia. All of which is basically meant to enhance the scope that ultimately you will have a system of an economic zone which China, as if it's not directly, indirectly, will have the controlling authority over it. In military terms, you've seen the creation of Chinese military establishments all over, right from the Gwadar port in Pakistan to the Hambantota in Sri Lanka, parts of a new port which has been set up in Myanmar. And on top of that, you are seeing the creation of physical Chinese enclaves all over. I mean, you'd be surprised to note that just like the international settlement which existed in Shanghai, for which the Chinese often talk at length about as being one of the most iniquitous things, today you have similar Chinese settlements which have been forced on them, say in Malaysia, in Gwadar, in Pakistan, and Pakistan is quite central to this whole project. In Pakistan, you have in Gwadar the growing, the development of a facility which would result in some 500,000 Chinese, mainly some civilians, but including the military, which will be stationed there. So the access of China to the Gulf, to the Persian Gulf, to the Arabian Sea will be ensured by that. So the scope of this, and there is some debate in China about how much you can force on other countries which do not have the capability of building their own infrastructure. The infrastructure of these countries, the economies of these countries may not be able to sustain the infrastructure projects which are being made, the very ambitious one, and which will result in those countries becoming more debt-ridden and therefore implicitly dependent on China. Pakistan has seen such a thing which is happening. You've seen such a thing happening in Sri Lanka, a crippling amount of debt which has resulted in them wanting, which has resulted in a 99-year-old lease being given on the port of Hambantota. You're seeing this in other parts of the Central Asian states where the Chinese investments have no connection with the ability of other economies to actually sustain and nurture that debt. It's also been very interesting if you look at it in strategic terms, how much Chinese investments have gone along. Take the case of Europe, which is not looked at in very great detail in terms of their influence. For example, the amount of Chinese investment in places like Greece, Spain, and Hungary, which are among the lesser developed of the European states. Today, China's foreign policy has become such a thing. And as you know that the European Union depends on unanimity when it comes to decision making. And we have a situation where, as far as all these three are concerned, they basically are now subjected to a lot of concerns which end up defending the positions of China. And therefore, you have the strange situation of China having a direct voice now within the European Union. And then if you take the case of in the case of the United Kingdom, the systematic approach in strategic sectors such as the public utilities, there's been a big conflict there along the 5G issue. And it may surprise you to know that 2/3 of the fee-paying students, and this is important, fee-paying students, those who pay the full fees of students in the British universities are made up of Chinese. The others, in terms of others, we may get subsidies from the state, etc., but fee-paying students are Chinese. So the control they exercise over the intellectual centers of a place like the United Kingdom is pretty awesome. Let me also come to a place like Australia, which is also been in the eye of the targeted area of Chinese ever since Kevin Rudd was the Prime Minister. And Kevin Rudd, having spoken Mandarin, had a certain soft corner and a belief that it was Chinese investments which would do the trick. And what we have seen of late is a growing revulsion which has led to two things. One, an actually act of parliament in Australia which has called for restrictions and monitoring to prevent China's interference in the internal politics of that country, number one. And number two, severe restrictions on Chinese nationals or companies with Chinese origin property in Australia. Now, I mention all this because the essence of what is that this system of wanting control, and sometimes they advance a little, sometimes they retreat, sometimes they go, but it's a very systematic way, including some things like data collection. You know, today there's been some talk about the misgivings in India about some number of CCTV cameras which the Delhi government has installed, which are of Chinese origin. And why is this such an issue? Because if you look at places like Zimbabwe, where the entire security apparatus is now controlled, the security information systems are controlled by China, which has enabled them to have perfect this facial recognition techniques cutting across all racial profiles. And that gives them a huge advantage when it comes to anything else. And that's an advantage which you should say. So it's a very, very systematic and strategic moves which are there. But also what is very, very significant is that what does China do when some countries behave a little awkwardly? I just give you two examples to suggest this. First, what happened was in Mongolia. In Mongolia, you must remember that there is a great deal of veneration for the Dalai Lama. The type of Buddhism they practice has a lot of proximity to Tibetan Buddhism, and there is a great deal of veneration for the Dalai Lama. A few years ago, after the Dalai Lama was invited to Mongolia and paid a visit there, China did something astonishing. It just unilaterally sealed the borders with Mongolia. With the result is that it led to a huge problem as far as the export of Mongolia's bananas were concerned. Now, it might sound a bit comic because, you know, bananas are not that bad, but it mattered to a lot to a country like Mongolia. It was so effective that basically the Mongolian government had to more or less eat humble crow and suggest that, look, you know, that was the last visit ever by Dalai Lama. A few weeks ago, Australia, and I'm giving the second example, Australia was one of those countries which suggested that there should be an international commission to look into the origin of the coronavirus. Now, China, as you well know, is very, very touchy about this because ever since Donald Trump called it the Wuhan virus, they've been very, very touchy about this whole thing, actually suggesting no, and they've been giving out some alternative spurious theories. I mean, I don't know where the virus originated from or what caused it, but China is very anxious to demonstrate that they had nothing to do with promoting this virus. Although they are one of the biggest beneficiaries, the international economic crisis may have resulted in a very big benefit. And when Australia wanted an international commission from the WHO to be done, China went into absolute hysterics. But I can give just a small example of the type of rhetoric which we saw from the state-owned papers in Australia. One was, and I just quote this, Australia is always there making trouble. It is a bit like chewing gum stuck on the sole of China's shoes. Somehow we have to find a stone to rub it off. So the disdain with which it looked upon Australia. And I'm giving you all this in the context of where does India look at it. India fits in for various different reasons. Number one, it fits in because India was perhaps the only power of significance throughout the world, in the neighborhood in particular, which sort of, when it came to the Belt and Road proposal, we said a flat, categorical no. The reason we cited, of course, was that, you had how can you have connectivity, unilateral connectivity over places which are disputed territory, and which we meant the upgradation of the Karakoram highway, we meant the enhanced plans for Aksai Chin, which China has more or less taken on its own. That was the ostensible reason. The real reason, as far as we are concerned, and we know that very well, is that we have deep and total suspicion of what the Chinese motives are. And while we have expressed it not very frontally, it's always there in our foreign policy thinking, which is one of the reasons why since 2000, significant upgradation of border infrastructure in the eastern sector. It may interest you to know that in the eastern sector, infrastructure in India was so remarkably underdeveloped, particularly, unfortunately, I don't want to get big party politics into it, but unfortunately during the Congress regime, it was so horribly underdeveloped to the extent that, never mind roads, you didn't have mobile connectivity, a lot of things. That enhancement is something which has really, really upset and think about China. But the timing of it is really the point, is that India, once again, and this may be one place where you could draw a certain analogy with 1962, the belief that once again, India is getting too big for its boots, that unless India is somehow shown its place, we will have countries such as Vietnam, countries such as Malaysia, countries such as Japan, which entertain fundamental misgivings of what Chinese intentions are all about, not to mention large amount of Western countries which have always been a little suspicious of what China wanted to do, but for certain reasons have been drawn into their orbit. India will become an alternative focal point. And I think that's a very important thing to realize. And our diplomacy has in fact aggravated the Chinese sense of fears. The amount of moves which we've made, our capacity building. Look, I agree with anybody who says that, look, there's a sort of asymmetric relationship between China and India as far as military and economy are concerned. Yes, that's true. We, for instance, do not have the luxury, given our own domestic constraints, to be able to invest so heavily in neighboring countries. One of the reasons why we've lost out, for instance, in the development of the Colombo port, sometimes why our projects in Myanmar are not so speedily executed. And we have also been slightly, we have not performed as well as we should, say, in places like Mongolia. This is partly due to our own resources deficit. We don't actually have that much of money which we can spend
and divert from internal resources and put into other places. So these are some of the shortcomings. But despite this, we are gradually emerging as a possible, and I say possible because it's still very much work in progress, a possible alternative and an irritant to this grand global vision which China has posited to the rest of the world. It's that which has made an outstanding dispute with India being resurrected once again to make the point that we can pin you down here and you don't get around. So if you want peace with China, you must have a settlement which is broadly in line with Chinese thinking. I've spoken for quite a long time, and I think there might be questions, but I'll end with a decision which a Portuguese writer, his name is Bruno Macias, he's written a very lovely book on the Belt and Road, which I would recommend for everyone who's interested in the subject. And there is one particular paragraph which he contests the idea of how the Chinese have projected. And I know that in places like the Indian universities, there are a large number of people who are now academics, think tanks, etc., who are now gradually being beholden to the Chinese and being funded in a covert and sometimes overt way in Chinese, in their way, and some portions of trade which have become more or less hooked to the Chinese ecosystem. And for them, China's rise is peaceful. China doesn't have any aggressive intentions. China has big plans. India should join in. That's the more or less implicit, although they don't say the second part, the last part so frontally. The idea is that India should somehow join in. If only we joined in, then all these border disputes would end. China would have a ceasefire, etc. China would retreat, and we wouldn't be irritated by all these things. Maybe some people say, Dalai Lama is a bit of a problem, we should just somehow, we should wait for him to die and then we'll be rid of this Tibetan problem once and for all. These are certain utterances which have been there. It has a very powerful influence in certain foreign policy circles which have argued that India cannot afford two fronts. We cannot have Pakistan and we cannot have China. My own personal view is that when we talk about Pakistan or China, we are basically meaning the same thing. It's one big ring. Now, I'll just end by just quoting from this a passage from this person, Bruno Macias, and he talks about the Chinese vision of the harmonious world, which is being presented as the Belt and Road. And he writes, the idea of a harmonious world or a community of shared destiny may appeal to the pursuit of peace, cooperation, and respect for cultural difference. But when, in a curious imitation of the Western concept of the end of history, it is presented as the inevitable endpoint of historical development, it becomes uncompromising and oppressive. Once a community of shared destiny has been advanced as the only correct option, the temptation is to start identifying disharmonious elements, those who, as the Chinese authorities like to put it, still harbor a Cold War mentality or a zero-sum approach to world politics. The implication is that the same Chinese elites, and this is important, let me stress this point. The implication is that the same Chinese elites who developed the concepts guiding the Belt and Road must now be left to decide how those concepts are to be executed. Participants in the Belt and Road are thus pushed to a position where only two options are possible: agreeing to its basic tenets and goals, or declaring oneself on the wrong side of history. And as far as China is concerned, India has quite emphatically posited itself as the wrong side of what the Chinese consider is the world, is the future of the world, which is why I think these tensions are not likely to go away in a hurry. In fact, they will exacerbate, perhaps assume sometimes different complexions. And India's foreign policy in the future is likely to be shaped quite a lot by the looming China question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Uh, for now, the floor is now open for all the participants to ask questions. Right now, I'd like to start with a question that I have been thinking of asking you for some time now. Sir, in the Chinese media, though they are all mouthpieces of the government, there is a narrative going on that the aggression is because of uh, India letting its Chinese policy being directed by the US or being intervened by the US, and that is why, which they do not like. Whereas in the Western media, there is a narrative that China, especially the Chinese Communist Party, it has become frustrated because of this mistrust and talks going on within the country, that the government and about the Chinese virus, it is frustrated and talks that the Chinese Communist Party is broken. And out of this frustration, it is creating an atmosphere of external aggression in the country. And India seems to be a perfect neighbor for that, for creating a warlike situation. Beyond the bilateral war narrative that is going on because of the India building up infrastructure near the borders near the LAC. So, which of the two narratives has more weight as per you, since you are a senior journalist as well? So,
See, thank you very much. It's a very interesting point of view. Now, I certainly have seen absolutely no evidence to believe that the events in Hong Kong or some amount of dissatisfaction which may have resulted during the Wuhan lockdown is strong enough to override the feeling of enormous nationalism, pride, which the Chinese feel at present that their country, after a very long time, after a more than a century and a half, has finally become a major player in the world. I think I don't want to place a lot of emphasis on anecdotal evidence, but in case any of you have gone to an international airport, preferably in Europe, and been there at a time when the Chinese aircraft has landed, or aircraft from China has landed, and you're in the queue, you'll see the sheer aggression and the irritation in the minds of some of them that anyone else should be there. So there is this feeling that today we are tops. We control tourism of the world. Our numbers are controlling the universities. Our products are selling everywhere. Our brands are there. So that feeling, which has been consciously created and nurtured by the authorities in China, are, I think, of more greater consequence to overtake any minor irritant which is there as far as the Wuhan virus is concerned. So I certainly believe that the Western narrative that there is a lot of discontent in China, I think, is basically an exaggeration. At the same time, yes, you're completely right in the belief that the perception in China, and this has always been, China has always, for the past 100 years, since 1840, this is one of the points which I tried to mention in my article right from the Opium War to 1949, China has always viewed India as a lackey of the imperialist powers. Never mind what Jawaharlal Nehru said, never mind the nice things which Rabindranath Tagore may have said, those were small incidents. By and large, China saw the opium trade being controlled by Indian intermediaries, notably the Parsis of Bombay used to control the opium trade. Similarly, the Sikhs and during the Boer War, It was the Indian forces which came and which played a very important role in crushing the Boer uprising, and the international settlement in Shanghai was policed always by very visible-looking Sikh policemen, and so that image in their minds that Indians basically they are lackeys of Western powers. So that image is very strong in their mind, and the recalibration of India's relationship with the Western powers, certainly a certain coziness which has come about between India and, more importantly, equally, I don't think we should forget the coziness which has come about between India and Japan. Japan is very, very important in terms of the Chinese psyche, and they see India and Japan as working in tandem. India and Vietnam, countries which the Chinese have come to hate for different reasons. So I think you've got to look at it in those terms as part of an assertion of Chinese nationalism which has come about, and therefore when they say, well, we don't believe in Article 370 changed the status of Ladakh, etc. Yes, of course they were unhappy, but they were unhappy about Article 370 partly because they were doing the bidding of what they see as Pakistan. So while there is a certain concern within China about what's been happening in Xinjiang and about the Uyghurs, these are offset by the larger thing that, look, Pakistan is our most important strategic ally in the region. It is a crucial element in the Belt and Road system. As far as China is concerned, Pakistan is as good as an economic colony, if not a political colony of China. And therefore, in these circumstances, anything that hurts India is to its advantage. Whether this was a factor in it or not, I cannot say, because it's so difficult sometimes to pinpoint decisions. There have been suggestions that there is an underlying conflict between Xi Jinping and the PLA. I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is all speculative. I mean, even if there is a conflict, what importance does it have in strategic terms? I certainly know for a fact that when Xi Jinping came in 2014, and at that time the PLA started its incursions in the border, Xi Jinping was a little embarrassed. I mean, this is what we've got from there. But whether that has any greater significance, we don't know. But Xi Jinping was new at that time. Today he's the supreme leader. His power is almost equal, if not greater, than what Mao even enjoyed or Deng Xiaoping ever enjoyed. So it's a different ball game altogether. But I think that if you've got to buy I don't think the Western narrative is at all relevant in the case of India. And I think that the Western narrative is a bit self-serving. It's what you like things to happen rather than what is happening. And the Chinese certainly have a certain view of the world which they're pushing forward with this. I think that's why I'm saying it's very important to try and, much as possible, to try and understand what your adversary is. I think in India sometimes we are, and I'm sorry to put this as a critique of our China studies, we haven't yet built up the sufficient resources within the country, whether in terms of their language or their culture, etc., to be able to study China, and neither have we taken advantage of those who are willing to help, and Taiwan being a very good example, Japan being another good example of this. So we've been rather lax in terms of our intellectual understanding, which will also affect your strategic decision making of China. I can't hear.
We have 3 questions in the chat box. I will read out 2 of them, and then I will read the third one later on after we are done with these 2 questions. So the concept of coexistence is somehow hampering through the intervention of Chinese Belt and Road Initiative project in continents. How do you look into it, and what role can India possibly play in an alternative direction? This is one. And the second question is, how can Chinese commitment to bilateral resolution of Kashmir and construction of CPEC through Indian territory of Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir, should India disown one China policy, support Tibet and Taiwanese independence, citing Chinese CPEC as a reason?
Let
These
me
are the two
come
questions, sir.
let me come to the second question first. You know, it's a bit like the Tibet card. People say, why don't we play the Tibet card? No, you didn't play if you don't play a card for 50 years or 70 years, as the case may be, that card has no value. We have always been defensive about the fact that the Chinese occupation of Tibet, Beijing's extension of its influence into Tibet was a grave setback to Indian security. Because at one level we disowned the idea of this Curzonian doctrine which shaped Indian foreign policy since about the 1900s. And the other end, we said, we are not, nothing to do with the imperialists of the past. We are not the inheritor regime of the Raj. We are basically into Afro-Asian solidarity. You can't say that and then follow that. So there's been an internal inconsistency of that. Secondly, as far as Taiwan is concerned, there is no need to explicitly state in favor of Taiwanese independence. What is important is to strengthen your relationship with Taiwan. It is to use Taiwan as a window of understanding China a little more deeply, and use it very strategically, just as we use Israel quite strategically to our advantage. As far as the question of their as far as the question of them, the Belt and Road actually impinging on this what is called disputed territory, yes, it's right, and that's the reason we gave for opting out of the Belt and Road initiative and not participating in it. The question of coexistence. Now, when China talks about coexistence, it has a very loaded meaning. It sounds very nice. But what it means in terms of their idea of coexistence is coexistence with the Chinese by virtue of their superior military, by virtue of their superior economy, having a decisive say, a controlling authority, almost a set of veto over India. And that's what they mean by coexistence. That as long as we don't do anything to promote India's independent clout, coexistence is fine. But the moment we sort of say, look, we too have an area of influence which goes beyond the borders of India, and that too we too have a certain design, that we have a certain alternative. We don't like to live in the world where the Belt and Road means that the whole issue becomes one of the control of the Middle Kingdom. Then we get into a clash with them. Their vision of coexistence is very, very directed at establishing the Chinese hegemony. It's really hegemonism of the worst variety and of the most crudest variety which we are seeing in as far as China is concerned. And what strikes me as being very, very odd is that how much of this hegemonism and these spurious doctrines of peaceful coexistence have found play within India, which to the Chinese eyes only means India is afraid, Indians are afraid. And the Chinese will play on that internal divisions of India quite a lot. If anybody who wrote the manner in which China reacted to the Pokhran 2 explosions in 1998 will realize how much
China will do. China will go to any lengths to actually make sure that our sense of assertiveness is blunted.
Thank you, sir, for your remarks. We have three more questions, but since we are running short of time, I would like to request sir to keep remarks a bit short, as we are already running out of time. Now I will read out questions for you, sir. At the present scenario, is it the right time for India to leverage its consumer base and put pressure on the international brands that if they want to sell to India, then they make on Indian soil by Indian workforce, which will further impact the economy of China and gradually push us towards Atmanirbharta?
No, I don't think it will affect China that much, but it will certainly benefit India. I don't think it would be wrong to say it affects China that much. No, I think China has enough. China has enough surplus. China has enough leverage so far. But if in India we deny China another huge market which they have, but mind you, I also believe that China is not going to take this lying down. So what we are seeing in Nepal, what we are seeing that they will use their borders, they will use the leverage of certain neighboring states to actually try and undermine. And they will use Indian domestic politics to try and undermine this so that we can open up China. But it's important that we stick to this and use the weight of the sheer range of our market to get as much Indian, to make in India if possible.
Thank you, sir. My next question is directed to Mr. Abhijeet Pandeyji, since it involves Mongolia, Inner Asia, and he is also an expert on Mongolian, I guess. Sir, in what ways Mongolian diplomacy can be helpful, given the situation in subcontinent where countries like Nepal is now contesting with us, moreover, where we have decade-old friendly relations? So please keep your remarks a little bit short, sir.
Well, our biggest, there are two big advantages we have in Mongolia. The first is the cultural links. But what is also undeniable is that we are also facing about 50 years when Buddhism was put under a serious challenge. And today, when we are talking about revival of Buddhism and re-establishing our connection, it is, however, important to recognize that it plays a small, its strategic value is limited, although very important. Secondly, till we can actually create a system whereby our software companies, our manufacturing companies can actually go out and aggressively scour markets overseas, sometimes with a bit of help from our foreign ministry, with the help from our banks and things like that. That's not going to happen. And in Mongolia, we still have to develop connectivity. We still don't have direct connectivity with India in terms of mobile. We still don't have direct flights. And I mean, that's giving you some examples. So there's a long way to go. China is way ahead.
And the last question for today's session. As cyberspace became treated as the fifth dominion of warfare across the world, where do the concept cyberspace stand when it comes to India-China? As we see today, the conflicts at the India-China spill over to cyberspace. Sir, can you specifically provide us inputs on cyberspace concept here?
Please, no, I'm not an expert in that. I cannot. I mean, there are people who understand this. But let me put it this way, that I think in India, we have been rather negligent in developing our software, IT, and the industry. We have taken pride in the fact that we've managed to earn a lot of money in it, that it occupies a large sector of the service sector in India. But what we haven't really factored in is the fact that we are still occupying the lowest ends of the value chain. That unless we move up the value chain in a considerable sort of way, that we're not going to do. And we have to make far more strategic investments overseas. China has made those. We are not making those strategic investments overseas. And that's what is jeopardizing our
thing. We have to not only protect ourselves inwards, we have to also think strategically outwards. And I think while we've done a very good job in trying to protect ourselves inside, we haven't yet done a very good job, or we are still in the process of evolving a mindset whereby we can look at what can be done by India, how we can leverage India overseas. Our use of soft power, our use of cyber power, our use of other power is still not up to scratch. We have a long way to go. And I think that's the challenge which we've got to accept, that this is work in progress and we've got many, many miles more to travel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And thank you very much to Abhijeet Pandey ji as well for their wonderful remarks. Thank you, sir, for very detailed and
Thank you.
thank you for the very detailed briefing of the issue. And thank you to Abhijeet ji as well for a brief and concise introduction to the issue that we are facing right now. I hope it was very informative for all of our participants. And now with that, we would like to bring this session to an end.